Chapter 851. Leon's Despair 1. Returning to the room, the others were already doing a lot better. Julian. To some extent, they could all speak now, but their voices were all hoarse. With the help of the wall, Leon helped himself up. His voice was especially hoarse. How are things? Honestly, I couldn't take him seriously. I knew that the situation was serious and all of that, but his voice was really deep. Fine. What do you mean, fine? Aoife asked, similarly massaging her throat as her brows furrowed tightly. Evelyn is doing fine, she just needs some time. She went through a lot. At least, to me, Evelyn appeared to be doing fine. She was trying her best to be fine. I did try my best to help her calm down in secret, removing a lot of the sadness that lingered inside her chest, but I didn't do too much. If I wanted to, I could have easily removed all of the sadness in her body. Although it wouldn't be easy, I could do it. But I didn't, because emotions were fundamental. They were the things that drove someone to grow. Like memories, they existed to make one understand and feel. If no one ever felt, they'd never grow. That's good. I wanted to thank her. You can do that later, Aoife. I stopped mid-sentence, feeling the weird stare I was receiving from Aoife and the others. Eventually, my head turned in Leon's direction. Oh, you sounded the same. Quote. Couldn't tell you apart. Quote. Stop giving me that look. Do your best to recover. We'll be leaving soon. According to Evelyn, the cold might return soon. Although the curse had been the thing mainly responsible for the extreme weather, it was also true that goddess Clora herself was helping the city deal with some of the cold. This place was naturally cold, and being the mirror dimension, extreme weather was common. We might not turn into statues again, but we're not in the state where we can simply ignore the cold. Everyone was tired, and our mana reserves were low. In our current conditions, staying here for much longer wasn't going to do us any good. Quote. Where will we be going? I looked at Aoife and answered, we're going to go to the one who is responsible for all of this. The God Hunter. I thought about it on the way back to the building, and in the end, it was for the best if we looked for Delilah first. If what I heard from Evelyn was true, then it was very likely that Delilah's mind was currently being consumed by the darkness that lingered inside of her. The longer things dragged on, the more dangerous things would become. I had to reach her before this crossed a line that could not be undone. Why are you looking at her? I looked at Aoife again. She looked at me weirdly and then looked to her right, where Leon was. Quote. I was the one who spoke. Oh, I know. So then, I just didn't want to look at you. Quote. Suddenly, I'm starting to miss the old Julian. So he said. Regardless, what was important at the moment was for everyone to rest. Everyone's conditions were still poor, and in our current state, if something did happen, we wouldn't be able to do a single thing. Moving towards the nearby sofa, I slumped down and covered my face. Thinking about the time that I spent here with Evelyn and the others, I closed my eyes and let myself drift into sleep. I think I'm starting to hate the cold. I managed to get some good sleep. Although I didn't know how long I ended up sleeping, it was at least for several hours, as I felt a lot more energized. When I opened my eyes, there was nobody else in the room. Turns out, they had all left the room. I was able to spot them easily once I got out of the room. They all stood together, staring into the distance. As a soft breeze blew and my hair scattered in front of my face, I lined up with them, eventually catching sight of Evelyn's figure as she quietly stood before the thousands of different statues. She wasn't polishing them like before, nor was she doing anything to them. Evelyn just stood in front of them. In absolute silence. Quote. The silence dragged on for several seconds until Evelyn brought the bottom part of her palm to her face and wiped whatever was stuck in her eyes. Eventually, she turned to face our direction. Quote. Are you guys ready? Her voice was a little hoarse, but nobody said a thing. I'm feeling better. I think we can go. Yeah, I'm also doing better. Everyone calmly nodded while staring at her, until eventually all eyes turned on me. I didn't answer immediately and stared at the statues in the distance. In all honesty, my feelings for the statues weren't that deep, besides a few of them. But it was those few that made my heart grow heavy. What was supposed to be a simple city turned into something that had almost killed all of us. If not for Evelyn, I couldn't have imagined how we'd have been able to get out of this situation. I'm still far from adequate. But it wasn't like I didn't know this. There was still much for me to do as I eventually turned to look at Evelyn. Let's go. I can feel the cold picking up. Evelyn nodded before turning away, shifting her attention elsewhere as she walked ahead. Having already explained the situation to the others, they didn't say anything and followed her in silence. Nobody was in the mood to speak. For all of us had essentially almost died. Walking away with the others, I slowed for just a second and looked back. Rows upon rows of statues stood where the facility had once loomed, their figures frozen in place as they faced our direction. Their icy surfaces reflected the harsh white sunlight, gleaming under my view. They all seemed to be staring towards a certain direction, and when I looked back, my eyes fell on Evelyn's back. Not once did she look back as she walked away. Her gaze seemed firm, as though her goal was set. For some reason, it felt as though all of the statues were staring at her. I knew that it was impossible and that it was probably my imagination, but under the bright light of the sun, Evelyn's figure appeared especially bright. The entire world had turned to ice. The people, the buildings, the city itself, nobody had survived. Yet even as the people froze, the structures glazed over, and the city collapsed under the weight of frost, one final ember endured, flickering faintly amid the fading cold, waiting for the impossible moment it could ignite once more. Even if the world shattered before her eyes, she stood tall. For she was mad enough to believe she could still keep her promise. Such was the woman who stood before me. The last ember of Isilra, the city of ice. Step, step, the quiet echo of her steps sounded in the silence as her figure drifted silently amidst the cracked earth. Her figure moved like a drifting shadow, as though the world itself barely registered her presence. There was something distant about the way she walked, as if she did not fully belong to the ground beneath her feet. But above all, her terrifyingly beautiful features meant nothing beneath the expression she wore. There was no warmth in her face. No flicker of emotion to soften it. The cold indifference in her gaze overshadowed everything else, turning that beauty into something distant and unsettling. Her dark eyes remained fixed ahead, as though the world before her was little more than a passing detail. Quote. She came to a quiet stop at the edge of the cliff. The wind rose gently, tugging at the fabric of her clothes and brushing strands of hair across her face. She did not react to it. Her posture remained steady as she looked out over the vast city below. She could feel the presence of numerous people as her dark eyes flickered. Her hand eventually raised, and a black pool formed beneath her as dark hands began to crawl out, grasping onto her feet as she continued to stare at the city. Even from where she was, she could feel the heat of the place. It felt rather annoying, but most importantly, her eyes remained fixed on the numerous people that existed within the city. Her hand continued to hover over the city. With just one simple move, she could wipe it out. She had the power to do that. And above all, this was the only way she'd guarantee her survival as blood began to seep out from the corner of her pale face. Quote. The woman's hand remained fixed on the city, trembling slightly as she clenched her teeth, voices whispering inside her mind. The hand beneath her continued to crawl up, reaching her waist. What are you waiting for? You're doing them a favor. By killing them and absorbing them, you're helping them get rid of this shitty life they have. You'll be saving them. Single quote. You must have felt it, right? You are still not quite strong enough to defeat the gods. You need to absorb more. At this rate, you'll die from the injuries that you sustained from your recent fight. You have to do this. For what they did to you. Everyone is guilty. The gods, the people, everyone. The woman's hand continued to shake. This time, it shook even more fiercely as blood continued to seep out from the corner of her lips, her face turning even paler. The more the voice whispered in her mind, the more it seemed to take away at her consciousness. Even now, she could hardly recall what had happened before coming here. Her memories were like a blur, and the more time passed, the more she seemed to be forgetting. The only thing she knew was that she needed to kill them. The 7 gods. Yes, they had to die. In particular, one name stood out. Oricleus. He seemed especially important. Yes, she had to kill him. Stop hesitating. You need to kill them all. You need to kill. The voice came to an abrupt halt as the woman's face froze up. The pool underneath her also shrank immediately as the hands crawled back down and faded. Turning to face a certain direction, the woman's brows furrowed tightly as she muttered, "The connection is gone." How is this possible? The shock merely lasted a few seconds as her face eventually turned cold. Without a second thought, her body began to fade as she disappeared from the spot. Who dared to touch what belonged to her? Chapter 852, Leon's Despair 2. Clank, Clank. Sparks burst into the air as heavy metal struck against metal, the sharp clang echoing throughout the cramped room. Each hammer blow rang out with force, reverberating off the tight walls and rattling the tools hanging nearby. Heat rolled through the space in thick waves. Clank. The forge roared brighter with every strike, flames flaring and twisting as they licked higher, casting wild shadows across the walls. Standing amidst the raging flames was a broad, towering figure. His back was massive, shoulders wide and solid as iron beneath the firelight. The heat did not seem to faze him. Sparks struck his skin and fell away harmlessly. Long red hair flowed down his back in heavy strands, catching the orange glow of the forge. His silhouette loomed against the blaze, steady and immovable, as if he belonged to the fire itself. Clank, 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 clank. The hammering did not stop. Even as the flames surged higher and the heat intensified, the rhythm remained steady. Sweat streamed down the man's massive frame, tracing along his muscles before dripping onto the stone floor with a faint hiss. Still, he did not slow. His movements were precise and relentless, each strike measured yet powerful. It was as though time no longer applied to him, as though the outside world had ceased to exist beyond the anvil and the metal beneath his hammer. Step. But the rhythm broke at the sound of a single step. The man's movements came to an abrupt halt as the glowing weapon before him started to cool down. He raised the hammer again, but soon dropped it. Why did you show up here? His deep voice reverberated across the room, only to be replied to by a cold voice. I'm checking up on your progress. How long until the relics are created? The man didn't reply. He simply stood before the raging fire, his muscles bulging as he tightened his grip over the hammer. There seemed to be a lot that he wanted to say. But eventually, he stopped himself. It'll be done soon. This isn't something that I can accomplish easily. That's good. Emmett replied, the flames flickering across his pupils as he slowly turned away to leave. But just as he did, Veltress's voice echoed in his ears again. You've changed. Emmett's steps came to a pause. Though you may not realize it, you've changed. You weren't like this before. It's like you've been consumed by something. I don't quite know what it is, but everyone has realized it. Torin in particular is concerned about it. Just what are you planning? What did you see? Let us in on it. Aren't we? Just do what you've been tasked to do. Emmett cut him off, his eyes turning hazy. The old man's expression shifted slightly as he opened his mouth, but Emmett spoke before he could get another word out. Change sometimes is necessary to ensure survival. These were the last words he said before leaving the room. Julian. Bringing me out of my thoughts was Evelyn's voice as her steps paused and she turned to look in my direction. Just one look, and I instantly understood. She's coming for us. There was no need for us to look for the God Hunter. In that case, the next destination is clear. Veltress's domain, the Land of Fire. We're really going there? Anne asked, her expression especially grim. I looked at her and nodded. Yes, we must go there. That was where Noel was locked up. To save him, I had no choice but to go there. Brushing her long red hair back, Aoife looked at me as she spoke. Honestly, it's not like I fully understand what you're trying to do since you've yet to explain the entire situation to us, but do you think it's even possible for us to achieve your goal? Considering our current situation, I don't know if it'll be possible. From how I see things will only get harder for us. Her words made everyone pause as they all turned to look in my direction. I could see that everyone appeared to share the same thoughts as Aoife, but had yet to voice them for one reason or another. In hindsight, their worries weren't without merit. It's true, going to save Noel sounds like suicide. There was no way we'd be able to do much at our current strength. We were still far too weak to face the likes of Cithras or even his followers. Dawn. Despite this, it wasn't like I didn't have a plan. I would have never have proposed something like this if I didn't have a plan in mind. It was dangerous, but it was doable. Furthermore, with the possible addition of Delilah, the chances of succeeding were even higher, granted we wouldn't meet Cithras. Still, I had my own way of dealing with him. Let's set the goal aside. At our current pace, we probably won't be able to reach the Land of Fire anytime soon. Anaz pointed out the obvious as he turned to look behind. In the distance, the outline of Isilra appeared. According to my estimates, it should take at least 2 months. And that's granted we don't meet any trouble along the way. I knew. This much I had calculated in advance. Realistically speaking, it should take us half a month to reach the outskirts of the Land of Fire. However, this was the mirror dimension we were talking about. The terrain was different than how it was in the past, with many incredibly annoying things along the way. There also existed monsters, and there was no guarantee that issues like what we encountered wouldn't arise. 2 months was a safe estimate. But that's fine. I was rushed, but not to the point where we needed to exhaust ourselves in order to reach the place. In fact, the slower things were the better. Single quote. Well, that was my original plan anyway. All of a sudden, I raised my head to look up towards the sky. The others followed as well, as they seemed to have sensed the same thing I did. Almost immediately, the expression of everyone present tightened. Something is coming. Kira's words brought a sudden tension to the group as everyone readied their weapons, the mana inside of their bodies churning out. Despite their exhaustion, they all looked ready to fight. However, the closer the entity became, the grimmer their expressions became as they felt the overwhelming pressure coming from the distance. Shit. Kira's expression was especially grim as a dark pool began to form beneath her feet, her body starting to sink into the ground beneath. Evelyn's expression was equally as serious as lightning began to crackle around her body, and the air around her started to condense. I looked at her in surprise, getting a sense of the power that she was summoning. Could that be? This felt a lot like the integration of her domain. No, it's not quite that, but the power behind that attack is quite frankly incredible. The air around Evelyn warped as power started to accumulate around her. Crack. The hair on my body rose at the sight of her attack, and just before she could continue further, I pressed my hand against her shoulder and stopped her. Hey, you can stop. Quote. Evelyn's body stiffened momentarily, her head turning to look at me. I glanced back at her briefly before lifting my head and looking into the distance. Toward the source of the pressure. At first, it was nothing more than a dot in the sky. Small and indistinct against the vast gray sky above us. As it drew closer, the shape began to take form. A massive silhouette emerged from the haze, floating high above the land. Its outline grew clearer with each passing second, revealing an enormous body suspended in the air. The sheer size of it was overwhelming. A vast shadow spread across the ground beneath, swallowing hills and trees alike as the creature continued its silent approach. As its features became clear, everyone's expression changed as the mana inside their body retreated, and Kira muttered, "That's quote. A dragon." Leon finished the words for her, his eyes entranced by the sight in the distance. "It's a dragon." My eyes remained fixed on the towering figure as it closed the distance at terrifying speed. What had seemed far away only moments ago was already nearing us, cutting through the sky with dominance. In mere seconds, it was above us. Its massive wings beat once, then again, each movement sending powerful gusts crashing down onto the ground. Dust and debris spiraled outward as the wind pressed against my clothes. It hovered there, immense and imposing. Then its gaze shifted. Slowly, its eyes settled on me. And then, "Human," it called out to me, forcing me to smile. And greet back. Pebble. Swoosh. The dragon's massive wings beat again. This time, the wind was even stronger, slamming into us like a physical force. The ground trembled beneath the pressure, dust and loose debris whipping past in violent spirals. I did not move. I remained where I stood, staring up at the enormous dragon before us as its dark scales glimmered under the light of the white sun. Staring at its large frame and powerful pressure, I couldn't help but think about the past and how the once lethargic cat that would constantly bicker and get bullied by an owl had grown into a fine dragon. Quote. For a moment, the world seemed to come to a complete still as the two of us stared at each other. But the silence was shattered almost immediately. The dragon's enormous frame began to shrink at a startling pace. Its vast wings folded inward, scales compressing and dissolving into shadow as its colossal body rapidly condensed. In the span of a heartbeat, the sky was empty. A small black cat dropped from above instead. It shot downward rapidly and reached me in an instant, landing lightly on my shoulder. Its paws settled there with surprising familiarity, claws barely grazing the fabric of my clothes. Golden eyes blinked once as it looked at me. Quote. I've been waiting. That was all the cat said before nestling over to my shoulder, almost as if it was trying to take in my scent that it seemed to have forgotten. I've been waiting, it repeated again, its voice softer. I opened my lips to reply back, but right as I was about to speak, a certain voice reached my ears. Hey, Evelyn. My attention fell on Leon as he shook her shoulder. Then, grabbing her attention, he pointed at the cat on my shoulder and spoke, "That's a dragon." His eyes gleamed as he looked at the cat. He looked like a child who had just seen the world for the first time. A dragon. Chapter 853. Leon's despair 3. It was an unexpected situation, but it was also a very welcome one as I managed to reunite with Pebble. How were you able to find me? This was something that I was curious about. Even if I'm no longer a will, it doesn't mean that the bone in your body is fake. From the moment you entered the mirror dimension, I was able to sense your presence. That was the explanation that Pebble gave me. But in that case, I looked around. What about Almighty? I quite missed that tree. Why are you asking about that useless tree? The black cat's eyes narrowed as it looked at me. I merely smiled and returned. Seems like their relationship was still the same. The owl also sensed you, Pebble added, not looking very satisfied. In fact, there also seemed to be something that it didn't say to me, but very quickly, its chest swelled with pride. But unlike that owl, I am much faster. I was able to get to you quickly, while that useless tree will take longer. That makes sense. Pebble was a dragon, after all. It made sense that Pebble would be faster than a tree. But then again, the last time I traveled with Almighty, it was pretty fast too. In that case, it probably won't take long for Almighty to arrive. I thought about waiting for the tree, but Pebble leapt off my shoulder and looked back at me. Should we get going? Are we not going to wait for Almighty? I thought Almighty was coming here. There's no need to wait for the tree. Pebble licked its paws. But then, as if realizing the action was unbecoming of a dragon, it stopped and frowned. Quote. That stupid tree will arrive soon. Just leave someone here to wait for the tree. We can save more time if we go now. In hindsight, this wasn't a bad idea. I was already tired of staying in this place. Furthermore, with the addition of Pebble and Almighty, we'd be able to get to the Land of Fire in no time. How long do you think it'll take for us to reach the Land of Fire? Several hours, Pebble replied as a strange pressure began to form around its body, spreading toward us while its figure morphed and shifted. Wings burst from its back, and a large shadow fell over all of us. Leon's eyes grew especially wide as he nudged my shoulder and pointed. A dragon, quote. I looked at Leon, then at Pebble, as its figure shifted back into that of a dragon. The simple flap of its wings sent a strong gust of wind through the air, making my clothes and hair flutter wildly. From the moment it revealed its true form, I didn't wait and hopped onto its back. Let's go. We should be able to reach our destination quickly. I beckoned everyone else to follow. Besides Aoife, Kira, and the rest, Anaz and Anne stood rigidly, their eyes fixed on Pebble. They'd been oddly quiet since their arrival. Then again, they probably hadn't expected me to have a dragon as a companion. It's a long story. I'll explain to you two later. Thankfully, even in a daze, they both managed to get onto Pebble's back. The last to try and get on Pebble's back was Leon, still mumbling, "Dragon, finally, I can fly on the dragon again." At this point, I could practically picture what was going through his mind. He was probably imagining himself striking some heroic pose on top of Pebble's head, arms crossed, looking down on the world like a smug overlord. I knew this because he had tried it before. I felt a little bad, but, "Leon, I need a favor from you." Leon froze, his head stiffening as he looked at me from below. "Almighty will be coming soon. I need you to wait here for it." Quote. Leon's expression drained of color, his eyes wide and trembling as he looked at me. I could practically hear his thoughts. "No, what are you talking about? Do you know how long I've been waiting for this moment?" "I know," I nodded. "But, sacrifices must be made." Thump. Leon got on his knees. "What a loyal knight." Thump, thump, thump. "Leon, why are you banging your head against the floor?" He even started to pound his head to show just how much he respected me. I smiled and tapped on Pebble's head. Quote. "I knew I could count on you." Swoosh. Pebble's wings began to flap, sending a strong gust that made Leon's clothes flutter wildly and his hair scatter in all directions. But as loyal as ever, Leon didn't look up, he kept his head lowered, staring at the ground. I felt touched as his figure became smaller and smaller. I even waved at him. "See you later." Then, the dragon took flight. Swoosh. In just the blink of an eye, Leon's figure faded from view. The strong wind from Pebble's speed startled everyone, but I quickly used my mana to create a small barrier around us, and soon, everything settled. For the first few minutes, everyone gazed down at the ground in awe, the frozen land beneath us rising in sharp spikes of ice. Their transparent surfaces gleamed under the sunlight, creating a stunning visual. Even I couldn't help but feel the same. Despite having flown on Pebble's back before, the sight never failed to amaze me. But soon, I began to feel a series of eyes fixed on me. You. Kira gave me a strange look, glancing back, presumably toward the spot where we'd left Leon. I fail to believe that you couldn't have let Leon come here. I also doubt that the tree you were talking about would need to wait for Leon. Why did you not let him come? He seemed to really be looking forward to it. Kira's words seemed to echo the sentiment of everyone present. However, I had a very good reason for this. He's already been on Pebble's back before, and the last time he was here, he started posing while looking at the ground beneath like he was some sort of king. Quote. 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 On second thought, maybe you were right. Ahem. Aoife nodded next to her. Quote. That tree must need Leon's help. I'm sure that's what it is. Yes. Even Evelyn found herself agreeing. As my gaze swept over Evelyn's body, a thought surfaced in my mind as I shifted my attention between Kira and Aoife. It's worth a shot. The two of you, turn around for a moment. I want to try and see if I can do something. I'll explain later. For now, just turn your backs against me. Aoife and Kira paused, turning to face each other. But as they noticed the sudden shift in my demeanor, neither of them asked anything, they just turned back around. Evelyn gave us a brief glance before closing her eyes, as if she understood what I was trying to do. I was able to do it to Evelyn, but I wasn't able to do much. That's why I need more practice, but for now, I need to start doing something for the two of them, or a similar situation will happen to them. By a similar situation, I meant the time when the outer beings took over Evelyn's body. If that were to happen again, I wouldn't know how to stop it, especially now that they were aware of my existence. Single quote. Yeah, I need to take care of this issue now before it's too late. Thankfully, I wasn't as helpless as I was in the past. I knew what I had to do. Outer rune of containment. Taking a deep breath, 2 magic circles appeared in my hands. As my palms pressed against her back, the circles began to rotate slowly. I focused on keeping my mind calm, breathing steadily, while memories of the past with Evelyn replayed in my mind. Unlike the past, this process was much easier. With the spell already created, outer hand, everything became easy. This was the medium I had crafted to channel the source power, and as the 2 magic circles in my hands fully formed, Aoife and Kira's bodies stiffened. What are you? Black veins spread across their faces as their bodies began to twitch and squirm. I took another deep breath, feeling the drain on my mana, and forced the words out. Try to resist. But that was easier said than done. Their bodies trembled more intensely, and the black veins on their faces became even more pronounced. With each passing second, the mana inside me drained further. If not for the fact that I had already recovered, this would have really been extremely dangerous for me. Especially since I could feel the darkness inside their bodies trying to reach me. Almost as if it was trying to consume me. But I didn't let it as I clenched my teeth and kept my hands firm. KKH. UKHG. Kira and Aoife both groaned in pain from the strain of my actions, but all I could tell them was to resist as I poured even more effort into maintaining the spell. The result appeared almost immediately. -1, -1, -1, -1, -1. The calamity meter, which had been nearing its breaking point, began to retreat for the two of them. The decrease wasn't rapid, but it was noticeable. I could see the black lines around their bodies starting to fade, slowly growing fainter with each passing moment. J. Julian. But the physical toll my actions were taking on them was becoming more apparent as their screams grew louder. Anaz and Anne both stood, looking our way with worry, but Evelyn raised her hand to stop them, her expression steady. I also knew why they were acting like this. Aoife and Kira weren't just screaming, but their bodies were physically breaking down as blood began to seep out from their orifices. If I carried on further, then I'd create irreversible damage to them. That was why I had no choice but to stop here. Ha! The two of them slumped onto Pebble's back, their faces ghostly pale, and the black lines that had marked their skin finally began to fade. I was no different from them, exhausted and drained, and I had to prop my body up with both hands. Slumping back, I took several deep and uneven breaths as I tried my best to stabilize the mana inside of my body. Single quote. I think this is my limit. I was able to reduce their meter by about 5% each. Although this wasn't much, it was just the start. If I continue like this, I should be able to get rid of it completely, hopefully. Ideally, that was the goal. However, I knew that ideals were just ideals. There was no way things would be this easy. But there was no time to spare. Taking another deep breath, I looked at the gray sky above. As my mana started to accumulate again, I closed my eyes. A certain rune appeared in my mind. I think there are a few hours until we reach the destination. I might as well try and see if I can upgrade my spells. Opening my eyes again after my mana recovered a decent amount, I sat back up and extended my hand, forming a new magic circle. Without second thought, I began to fiddle with the spells. By the time I reached the Land of Fire, I wanted to see if I could evolve all of my spells. It had been a very long time since I had evolved my spells. Chapter 854, Land of Fire 1. Swoosh. Pebble's enormous wings beat once, the powerful wind scattering in every direction as its massive body gradually slowed to a halt midair. This is as far as we can go, human. Pebble's voice reached me soon after. I feel the presence of something powerful up ahead. Any more and we'll be in danger. For even Pebble to deem it powerful, whatever was up ahead was likely destroyer ranked or above. Most likely, it was a primordial rank. Looking down, I could already see that the ice was long ago replaced by a thick and dense forest. On the other side of the forest, there should be the Land of Fire. Anas spoke as he looked down. At the same time, he took out a map and looked at it. I'm not quite familiar with this place, so I can't exactly say where we are, but if I had to make a guess, we're nearly on the outskirts of the Land of Fire, likely in the forest of Melanchonies. Melanchonies. This rang a bell. Oh, fuck, not those things. Anne covered her face while ruffling her hair. I've dealt with those things before. Although they aren't quite strong, they're incredibly annoying. Once they lock target with you, it'll be impossible to escape them. Do we have no choice but to go through here? Anne looked at Pebble as she asked. Pebble flapped its wings once before its large head tilted slightly. It is the closest way. Ah, shit. Anne looked at me. But her words came to a sudden halt as a figure popped up next to me, looking exactly like one of the Melanchonies she was aware of. Her expression changed. There's one right here. I know. I extended my hand to stop her before she could do anything. This one is with me. I recalled the will, and only then did Anne realize that it wasn't exactly a Melanchonie. This is the second time that you've shown me something like this. What exactly did you do? It's a bit complicated. I'll explain along the way. I tapped the top of Pebble's head. Understanding at once, its massive wings gave a heavy beat, and its large body began to descend. As we dropped lower, the forest below grew sharper and more oppressive. Towering trees loomed over everything, their bark dark as charred bone, their thin branches twisting upward like sharp spikes clawing at the sky. The closer we came to the forest, the heavier the air felt. But above all, as I looked into the forest, I started to wonder just what sort of creature was staying inside that even Pebble had no choice but to land. I hope that it's on the same level as Zaahirl. Granted, I wouldn't need to fight it. In fact, I had long been aware of the existence of such a powerful monster within this vicinity. It was one of the main reasons why I wanted to come here. But that was merely on the premise that I wouldn't need to fight it. Having already used the Oracleus's eye, there was no way I could deal with a creature of that level again. The best I'd be able to do would be to use Eye of Existence and hope that I could buy enough time for us to leave, but that was the best case scenario. As Pebble descended from the sky, we all hopped off its back. It's quite a lot warmer here. I can feel the heat too. I'm already starting to sweat. We may not have noticed the weather change since we were in the sky, but the moment we came down, the heat became obvious. All of a sudden, I'm starting to miss the cold. Kira commented while taking off some of her heavier clothes. I did too while looking towards the distance. Leon should be arriving soon with Almighty. In the meantime, I should try to think more about my next steps. Other than that, I was also quite exhausted. There was some success, but I had yet to fully improve all of my spells. There was still a little bit of work for me to do. Still, it wasn't like I wasn't able to upgrade one of my spells. In fact, I had. I pulled out my status screen. Filled circle. Julian D. Evanes. Level. 81 Tier 8 Magician. Express. 0%, 37%, -100%. Profession. Magician. Type. Elemental Curse. Type. Mind Emotive. Spells. Perfected type spell Emotive Sadness. Superior type spell Emotive Anger. Perfected type spell Emotive Fear. Advanced type spell Emotive Surprise. Advanced type spell, emotive joy. Advanced type spell, emotive disgust. Intermediate type spell, emotive love. Superior type spell, curse, outer hand. Advanced type spell, curse, condemnation of alakantria. Intermediate type spell, curse, nightmare hex. Intermediate type spell, curse, immersia. Intermediate type spell, curse, severed sense. Intermediate type spell, elemental, water breathing. Advanced type spell, body gliding. Skills: innate foresight, innate etherwave, innate veil of deception, innate cosmic suppression, innate mana sense, innate eye of existence. Filled circle. The main issue that I had when upgrading the spells wasn't just the runes. Fiddling and rearranging the runes was hard in itself, but the problem was that one needed to have a proper understanding of the spell for it to upgrade. That's probably why in the past I needed to fully grasp the spells before they would upgrade. The same thing goes for this. Thankfully, I already had a good idea of how most of my spells worked. The ones that I needed to work on the most were the intermediate rank ones. At this point, they were simply too weak for me. My next goal was to upgrade them. What do you think the situation in the Land of Fire is like? Anaz suddenly asked me. When I turned my head, Anaz was already sitting on the ground, taking out a small snack as Anne sat next to him, grabbing a chunk of his food. I'm not sure. I've never been there. However, Anne did mention to you before that lately there's been a situation with a second son, right? Oh, right. I had almost forgotten about it. Anaz continued. I haven't been able to find out much more, but looking up at the sky, I still can't see a second sun. Do you think that might have been a lie? I'm not sure about that. In reality, from the moment that a second son had been mentioned, I had already gotten a good grasp of what the situation was like within the Land of Fire. In fact, I even had an idea for the reason behind the second son as a certain figure came to mind. My chest grew heavier at the thought. If it was really him, then. Aside from that, I also heard that the Land of Fire is a lot different compared to the other places since they value strength and power above everything over there. My expression paused after hearing Anas's words. What do you mean by that? There's only one city in the Land of Fire. Anne spoke for him, taking another bit of Anas's food as he frowned and moved away from her. But as though she was an octopus, she clung to him and continued to steal his stuff while speaking to me. Everything else in the Land of Fire is essentially a desert. However, in such a rural place, almost everyone within the city is extremely powerful. Amongst all of the lands, the strongest warriors probably belong to the Land of Fire. This was new to me. To judge each other's strength, they have a sort of ranking for the top 100 people of the entire land, and those who make it to the very top will be able to meet with the city's governor. I don't know why you want to go to the Land of Fire, but if you have a goal, then this might be the best way for you to find what you want. Possibly. Honestly, probably not. I couldn't just go to the governor and ask where Noelle was being kept, could I? There was no way they'd tell me. For that reason, I wasn't that interested in this ranking system that they had. Suddenly, I snapped my head toward the distance. I rose to my feet at once as the ground trembled beneath us. A violent rumble split the air, and thick roots burst from the earth, tearing through soil and stone as they writhed upward like serpents. Then it emerged, almighty in all its glory as red leaves began to shroud the sky. I smiled at the sight. It's been a while. The tree stood imposingly, its presence even more pressuring than pebble. The air thickened around it, bending inward as though the forest itself bowed in submission. I started to move, but the tree suddenly convulsed. Spurt, and it spat a figure onto the ground, its form shifting once more and condensing into an owl as the owl flapped its wings and sat onto my shoulder. Human, Almighty quietly spoke, giving me a small nod of acknowledgement. I nodded back. It's good to see you again. From the looks of things, you've gotten stronger than the last time that I saw you. Passable. I am still far from primordial rank. However, the owl's eyes narrowed as it turned to face the forest. I feel a terrifying power hiding within the forest. I am aware. So what are you planning? I am planning on crossing the forest. The owl's eyes narrowed further as it looked at me. However, it didn't say anything after that and turned its attention elsewhere. I followed its gaze, and that was when I took notice of Leon. He was sitting by himself, touching the cracks in the earth with a lost look. I opened my mouth, but soon closed it. Let's go. Since he was here, there was no need to delay things further as I headed into the forest. The others followed. Swoosh. A subtle breeze drifted through the forest, slipping between the countless trees and stirring their bare branches into a soft, restless flutter. With the passing wind, a figure emerged at the forest's edge. She stood in silence, dark eyes narrowing as the earth beneath her started to darken. I can feel it. They're close. However, there's a troublesome existence here. Her eyes narrowed further, the darkness in her eyes spreading further. As she fixed her gaze towards a specific area, as if also noticing her presence, the forest seemed to come alive as all the trees fluttered at once. But it wasn't for long as the woman blinked slowly. The rustling stopped, and the presence faded. Without another word, she pressed her foot against the ground. From the tip of her shoe, darkness bled outward. It shot across the earth like a tidal wave, swallowing grass and stone alike as it surged toward the forest. Wherever it passed, color drained away, and the towering trees were slowly enveloped in a creeping, suffocating black. Watching the black take over the surroundings, she tried to take a step forward, but stopped, her head raising to look at the forest. For some reason, she found herself unable to move. But above all, why? The woman raised her hand and looked at the ring on her finger. Why did she feel a vague sense of familiarity within the forest? Taking another step forward, she stopped again. After which, the darkness that shot ahead retreated as she quietly stared at the forest, her eyes narrowing further before she disappeared from the spot. Chapter 855, Land of Fire 2. Boom! Thunderous cheers rolled through the sun-scour arena, crashing against the towering walls of ash and stone that encircled the colossal battleground. Tens of thousands packed the towering stands, their voices rising into a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the arena. Cloaked nobles, hardened mercenaries, desperate gamblers, and bloodthirsty spectators leaned forward from their seats, their gazes burning with anticipation. All eyes were fixed on the two warriors clashing in the center of the pit. The fight between the two had gone on for several hours, both battling until their mana completely dried up and there was nothing left in the tank. Their breathing came in ragged bursts as they staggered across the cracked arena floor. Despite the numerous injuries in each other's bodies, neither man allowed himself to fall. Bang! Fists swung through the scorching air. A brutal hook landed with a sickening thud, snapping one fighter's head to the side as blood sprayed across the sand. The other answered immediately, driving his own fist forward with the last shreds of strength left in his battered body. Bang! Bang! Blow after blow echoed through the arena. Blood dripped from torn knuckles and split lips, splattering across the fractured earth beneath their feet. The once pale sand had long since turned dark and muddy, soaked through with their blood. And still, neither warrior backed down. Wah! Kill him! Kill him! The depraved shouts of the crowd reverberated in all directions as the two warriors battled it out with their lives on the line. Neither seemed to be affected by the shouts, their entire attention was focused on the opponent ahead. This was no regular battle. It was a battle that went beyond simple survival. This was a ranking battle. Ranked 73 Kellic versus Ranked 68 Samola. The victor between the two would determine their overall ranking within the city. Fists were exchanged once more. Two heads snapped back at the same time, but this time, clenching his fist once more, Kellic's entire body squirmed and popped as it doubled in size. His eyes turned completely red as he threw a terrifying punch forward. Bang! There was nothing his already exhausted opponent could do. The moment Kellic's fist landed, Samola's head exploded. Blood spurted in all directions as the crowd thundered once more. Wah! Their depraved shouts filled the grounds once more as Kellic wobbled back, trying to keep his large frame from dropping to a knee. That was also the moment everything turned silent as Kellic turned his attention towards the far end of the arena, where a figure sat, his eyes drooping as he looked in Kellic's direction. Unlike the other spectators, he was different. His frame wasn't large, and his white robes hung loosely around his body, accentuating his grayish hair. But above all, just a simple look in his eyes was enough to make one submit. Kellic was no different as his head lowered, a primordial fear clawing at the deepest part of his being and causing his body to shiver continuously. He was well aware of the identity of the man in front of him. How could he not know? Ranked 1, Tharvik, the Dune Conqueror. Not bad. Tharvik's soft voice reverberated across the surroundings, causing Kellic's body to tremble even further. For defeating ranked 68 Samola, you shall be bestowed the 68th ranked. Congratulations. The surroundings thundered once more, but Kellic kept his head lowered. The surroundings turned silent after a brief moment as the figure at the center of everyone's attention stood up, flicking his hand. Kellic's head lifted as he raised his hand and caught a small flask, containing a deep red liquid. You have earned the right to baptize yourself. Kellic's eyes gleamed as he stared at the red liquid within the flask. Once again, congratulations, ranked 68 Kellic. Boom. The surroundings boomed once more as the crowd erupted into cheers. Tharvik didn't stay any longer. Upon handing over the liquid to the victor, he calmly walked out of the arena. But as he did, he eventually looked up towards the sky. Towards the two suns that hovered above. His lips curled into a smile. The moment we stepped into the forest, it felt as though we had been transported into a completely different world. The trees twisted together, their branches spiking upward as the dark bark blended seamlessly with the darkness around us. There was something about the air that felt suffocating. As if something was staring right at us. This place gives me the creeps. Kira muttered while looking around, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, while everyone else tensed. I activated Mana Sense and tried to detect anything. This is a forest where melancholies are supposed to exist. If I activate Mana Sense, I should be able to see if there's any of them hiding. But, nothing. This was a development that took me aback. From the very start, I had expected there to be a lot of melancholies or even monsters. However, regardless of which direction I looked, I couldn't feel a single thing. It was as if we were the only ones to exist within this dense forest. But how does that make sense? I don't detect anything. I shared my findings with the others. There's nothing near us. No melancholies or monsters. I also don't sense anything. Evelyn spoke up, her eyes opening as lightning crackled within her pupils. There's nothing near us. This left me unsettled. Was my information wrong, or were the monsters here somehow able to hide from us? What should we do then? As Aoife asked, Leon walked ahead. What else are we supposed to do? Let's go ahead. I agreed with Leon's assessment and followed behind him. At the same time, I kept Mana Sense active as I scanned the surroundings. However, even as we walked for the next dozen minutes, nothing out of the ordinary occurred. The trees grew denser, their bark thicker, and the darkness deepened. After some point, I started to lose track of the people around me. Thankfully, with Mana Sense active, I was still aware of where everyone was. But the same couldn't be said for them, as Kira's body suddenly glowed as flames emerged. As light flourished from her body, Aoife's gaze flicked towards a certain direction. Wait, she pointed in a certain direction. As we all followed her line of sight, a pair of chains met my vision. Those are. Aoife approached the chains and grabbed them. They look like chains. She pulled the chains apart. They're quite durable too. Very durable. She had to exert quite a bit of force before they snapped in half. Why are chains here? Anaz asked as he looked at the chains in Aoife's hands. Anne, who stood next to him, also took a close look at the chains before responding. If I'm not wrong, they probably belong to those from the city in the Land of Fire. Maybe they were trying to hunt for food. Food and water are quite scarce over there. That makes sense. Aoife continued to mess with the chains before tossing them away. We all proceeded ahead, but the more we walked, the more things we noticed. From chains to a piece of clothing, to helmets, and so on. It really does look like a lot of people were sent here. The deeper we walked, the more such items we saw. However, despite that, there appeared to be no single human within our vicinity. The same was for the monsters. Above all, the temperature started to rise the deeper we went. From hot to cold, Julian. You really can't expect the mirror dimension to be a normal place. Hearing Kira's gumble, I nodded. This really did feel quite uncomfortable. But just as I was about to reply to her, something caught my attention in the distance. A light. My heart skipped a beat. We're almost there. Everyone's steps hurried as we headed towards the light as it pierced through the numerous gaps created by the trees ahead of us. I still remained cautious as we continued ahead, but even as we drew closer and closer to the opposite end of the forest, nothing came to attack us. By the time we arrived at the forest's edge, greeted by the numerous dunes stretching across the horizon, a strong heat washed over our group. Wow, the heat was unlike anything we felt before arriving. It almost felt scorching, prickling at my skin as though I was standing in the middle of an oven. I had no choice but to coat my body with a layer of mana to endure the heat. I'm actually quite surprised that we were able to pass by the forest so easily. This is the first time we've gone through something without encountering any trouble. Stop jinxing it, I replied to Leon's words as he kept looking at the forest, seemingly waiting for a monster to jump at him at any given moment. It wasn't like I didn't get him. I was also at a complete loss. But this works out for the best. Still, don't let your guard down. I looked at the scenery ahead, my eyes eventually lifting to the sky. The moment they did, my expression changed subtly as I took note of the second sun hovering above, its presence just as bright as the other. In fact, I couldn't even tell the difference between the two. So it wasn't a lie. Anne mumbled, similarly looking at the second sun in the sky. There truly is a second sun. Quote. But how is that possible? Aoife looked up, her brows furrowed tightly as her eyes squinted under the bright lights of the sun. Don't you find it strange too? Before coming here, even when we were in the sky, there was no sign of a second sun. However, the moment we pass the forest, a second sun magically appears above. Something is not adding up. Quote. Evelyn's words had merit. Everyone else started to talk with each other, trying to figure out what the second sun meant and how it was possible for it to be there. At first, I was also confused, but the more I looked at it, the more I started to understand as my heart started to beat faster and faster. Bah, thump, it was so loud that I felt the pounding inside my head. That's no sun. Everything became clear to me in the next second as a knot formed inside my stomach, my expression quickly changing as I activated Lament of Lies to the maximum, not holding back a single thing as sweat poured from the side of my face. Julian, what's wrong with you? Where are you? That's not a second sun. I shouted, my expression tensing further. Almost as if something had set its sights on me, its gaze hovering over our general direction as the mana inside my body circulated faster, beginning to drain more quickly than before. But I had no choice but to do this. There was no other option. Because, slowly lifting my head up, what greeted my line of sight wasn't the sun. No, it was an eye, a large eye that seemed to overlook the entire world. Chapter 856, Land of Fire 3. The moment realization dawned on me, it felt as though a terrifying pressure closed in from every direction, plunging me into a smothering depth that made it hard to breathe. I felt suffocated. Even when I used Lament of Lies to hide my body, I didn't feel safe. That sun, that gaze, it continued to linger in the sky, looking down in my direction as if it had detected something. Holding my chest, I took deep, harsh breaths, forcing my mind to remain calm while the others hurriedly tried their best to hide their presence. The gaze continued to hover. It swept my area and the area around us. It kept looking as I held my breath. Did it see me? Did it spot me? It shouldn't spot me, but what if? Sweat poured from the side of my face as I tried my best not to make a sound or move. I just stood completely still, waiting for the gaze to sweep away. And soon, it did. The sun's attention fell elsewhere, and the suffocating pressure that I had felt faded. But even as the gaze left, I remained alert. I was still unsure of whether it had spotted me or not. What the hell was that? Annis's face was abnormally pale as he looked towards the sky. The others were no different, finally taking note of the abnormality of the second sun in the sky. Is that a monster? It's not. I shook my head while looking away from Anaz and back towards the second sun that hovered in the sky. If there had been any doubts before, there were none any longer. That wasn't a monster. That eye belonged to someone. Someone that I knew all too well. Dawn, or to be more precise, Atlas. He was here, looking, searching. Perhaps, he's long been aware of the fact that I was going to come here. In that case, things have become a lot more troublesome. But despite this, I had to continue. The current me couldn't deal with Atlas, that much was true. In every possible sense, rescuing Noelle was going to be an incredibly difficult task, and I understood that. I knew all of the risks. That's why I decided to do it. Because I felt like I could do it. Let's go. Taking out a cloth, I covered my face. At the same time, I suppressed my mana to an acceptable level while also changing my clothes. The others did the same, understanding my intentions. Do you think this will be enough? No, I shook my head while replying to Leon. That's why I'll keep using my skill to keep us hidden. However, once we find more suitable clothing or get a better understanding of this place, we can try to blend in better. The good thing was that this place was massive. While the eye had hovered in our direction before, I was certain that unless we did something out of the norm, it wouldn't notice us. There was simply too much land for it to cover to focus on all the little things that were happening. Quote. I don't know how the conditions of this place are, but keep your guard up. This is the mirror dimension after all. There's nothing about this place that is friendly. Taking a step forward and feeling my feet sink into the sand, I looked ahead as a sea of dunes stretched before my eyes, rising and falling in long, rolling shapes that seemed almost frozen in motion. Their wind-bent peaks curved like waves caught mid-crest, overlapping until they blurred into the distance. Above them, the gray sky hung low, one of the pale white suns half hidden behind the numerous dunes as its dull light washed the landscape in muted tones. The wind skimmed across the sand, carving delicate ripples along the slopes of each dune so that faint, wave-like patterns shimmered across their surfaces. As treacherous as the mirror dimension was, a hidden beauty still lay within it. One just had to look hard enough to find it. Asterisk. At first, the journey wasn't hard. The heat was strong, but we could still manage. This much felt manageable, but the more we walked, the more we started to realize that things weren't as simple as this. It first started with a faint hissing sound. The sound carried through the wind as though someone was whispering in our ears, but the more we continued, the more we realized that it was something else entirely, as our vision started to turn darkish yellow. I'm starting to lose my vision. My skin is starting to sting. Just what the hell is this? It's a sandstorm, Leon muttered, placing his hand over his face as he looked ahead. However, he soon realized that there was no point as he struggled to see more than a few meters ahead. I was no different. Hiss. The hiss of the wind grew sharper, rising from a whisper to a constant, rasping roar that swept across the dunes. Ook! Sand lifted into the air in thin veils, stinging against my skin as the gusts cut through the open desert. My vision began to blur, the horizon wavering as grains of sand drifted across my eyes. On the other hand, the distant suns, once bright and clear, faded into little more than pale white smudges, trembling like ghostly dots against the dark yellow sky. With every passing moment, the wind grew more piercing, howling across the dunes and bending their ridges and making it harder and harder for us to move. I thought would be all, but rumble, rumble, careful, quote. There's one coming from below. The sand beneath us suddenly shuddered, the smooth surface collapsing inward as if the desert itself were inhaling. A deep ripple tore through the dune, grains cascading downward as the ground split apart. From the opening, a massive maw burst upward, scattering sand in a violent spray. The sharp edges of numerous teeth flashed within the darkness of its mouth as it lunged straight toward us, the force of its emergence sending waves through the surrounding dunes. Unable to detect it with mana sense, I was caught completely off guard, but still managed to keep my bearings as Leon took out his sword, his eyes turned pitch black, and several stars faded from his eyes. Swoosh. His movements were fast. With one swift movement, he managed to cut the monster in half. But, swoosh, swoosh, things were far from over. The moment he cut down one, several others appeared as the sand beneath us continued to collapse, nearly making us lose our balance. Craw crack. Evelyn's hair swayed as bolts of lightning flickered across her eyes, and without wasting a moment, several magic circles formed around her, shooting down at the monsters appearing from every direction. Bang! The impact was devastating, sending several of the monsters scattering away as I finally managed to get a good look at them. Sandworms. Their frames were enormous, easily 4 or 5 times our size, their thick bodies coiling through the sand as though they were moving in water. Swoosh. Segments of armored hide rippled as they moved, each motion sending fresh cascades of sand sliding down their sides. One of them surged upward, and its maw opened wide. Careful. Instead of a single mouth, it split into 4 separate sections that peeled back from the center, unfolding slowly and disturbingly, almost like a flower blooming in fast motion. Each petal-like section revealed rows of jagged teeth lining the inner edges, glistening as grains of sand poured from between them. They charged at us relentlessly, barely giving us any time to breathe. It wasn't that they were strong, but there were many of them, and they charged at us from every direction. Swoosh. As the sand beneath me collapsed and one of them shot toward me from below, I glanced around before a magic circle formed in my grasp. Several chains shot out from the circle, gathering around my hand before shifting into a shield made of chains. Clank. Sparks flew as the sandworm's teeth met with my makeshift shield. But I wasn't done. The moment the shield blocked its attack, several chains shot out from the shield, shooting down the sandworm's mouth and entering its body. The sandworm flailed the moment it happened, letting out a sharp hiss as the chains continued to drive down. Its struggle didn't last long, however, as its body began to shrink, almost as if all the water were being sucked out of it. Thump. By the time its body fell, it looked completely different from when it first appeared, its body now extremely tiny. I looked at the spell in my hand, feeling a little satisfied as the shield tore apart and several chains moved around my body. This wasn't the limit to the improved skill, condemnation of Alakantria. There was still much more it could do. There's no better way than to test this here. And that was exactly what I did. As more sandworms began to appear from beneath the ground, I fought back with my new skills, reshaping the chains in all sorts of different ways and getting adjusted to the new skills. Thump, thump, one after another, the sandworms began to get taken down by me and the others. Taking them down one after another, I soon lost track of how many of them I managed to take down, but it had to be in the several dozen. The others were also faring just as well, getting rid of the sandworms without much difficulty. Even Anaz was faring quite well. But I soon began to realize something. Swoosh, it's not stopping. Pulling back, I looked beneath me as the sand split apart and several more worms appeared. They charged at us relentlessly, spraying sand in all directions, as I had no choice but to step up my game and start using my other skills. Thump, I started to kill at an even faster rate. Thump, thump, but even that wasn't enough. The more I killed, the more there seemed to be. It was almost as if it were an endless cycle. How many are there? It's not stopping. The others also appeared to have taken note of the situation. The monsters weren't strong, but they felt endless. Fuck, what in the world is this? Sliding down the steep face of a dune, I raised an arm to shield my face as the wind drove sand against my skin in sharp, stinging bursts. Grains scratched and prickled across my cheeks and forehead, forcing my eyes half shut as I struggled to keep my balance on the shifting slope. Ook! Through the haze, I barely managed to turn my head toward where the others had been. The air was dense with that strange, dark yellow tint, the blowing sand turning the sky into a blurred canvas where the two distant suns felt like pale white lamps that provided some semblance of light. But it was in the midst of that hazy observation that I noticed it. An enormous shadow. Its body faded in and out of my vision as curtains of sand swept past, revealing it for only a moment at a time before swallowing it again. Each brief glimpse showed something tremendously large shifting beneath the haze, its outline swelling within my vision as the hiss in the air grew stronger. My chest tightened. Then, it moved, an enormous fist shooting in the direction of the others, the pressure terrifying enough to make my chest feel heavy. Shit. Destroyer rank. Chapter 857. Land of Fire 4. The pressure was intense. Strong enough to make everyone stop as a large silhouette slowly emerged through the storm, its massive frame towering over us in every sense, barely visible through the swirling sand and wind. Swoosh! Its first shot down in the direction of the others. Careful, I wanted to reach them, but the distance was a little too far for me to cover. To make matters worse, because it was a monster, my emotive magic wasn't as effective. But thankfully, a figure blurred right before the incoming attack. Holding tightly onto his sword, Leon's entire body radiated a powerful pressure as his eyes turned an even deeper shade of black. He slashed forward with all his might. Sheeing, his sword came into contact with the fist head-on. But, the fist completely avoided Leon's sword, phasing right through it before striking him cleanly and sending him crashing back against the sand. Thump, Leon, ... Shit, Leon. The impact sounded devastating, and when I looked in Leon's direction, I saw him on the ground, blood dripping from his face as he struggled to get up. The monster didn't give him time to breathe. Following the strong gale of the wind, the monster arrived before Leon in no time, its enormous frame shifting once more as it launched another attack. Its movements were so fast that hardly anyone could keep up with them. To make matters even worse, the sandworms still attacked us from every direction. I watched as Leon forced himself up to avoid the incoming attack, sand spraying in every direction as he pushed off the ground. In the next instant, he rushed forward and followed up with another attack, but just like before, the creature effortlessly phased through Leon's strike and slammed into his body, sending him spiraling back across the sand. Bang! How is this possible? It all happened incredibly fast, but I was still able to see everything as Leon looked similarly shocked. No, shit, I have to help him. With no time to spare, I drew several swords and shot them toward the enormous creature, using my version of telekinesis, granted by Almighty's evolved skill. Swoosh! The swords cut through the storm rapidly, shooting at the creature from all directions. But, swoosh, swoosh, the swords did absolutely nothing, passing through the colossus as it continued to charge in Leon's direction. To make matters worse, the sand beneath me split as several sandworms shot up at once. Quote! ! Dealing with one of the sandworms, I looked towards my shoulder where an owl appeared. I nudged in Almighty's direction. Can you, ... That's a sand titan. The owl cut me off before I could speak. It's not something that I can deal with. It won't fall for my illusions. Then, not even that cat will be able to do it. No physical attack will get to the sand titan. You might be able to deal with it if you combine forces with that woman named Anne, but it'll take everything you have in order to do so. Bang! Leon. Sand scattered in all directions as the Titan attacked once more, Leon's body crashing onto the sand as blood seeped from every part of his body. Looking at him, he looked completely helpless as he struggled to get back up. His dark pupils trembled further as he stared at the Titan, and despite his injured body, it was clear that he had broken several bones. Mana started to accumulate around his sword. Power surged through him. He seemed to be getting ready for a powerful attack. I looked around. My eyes settled over to Anne. She had managed to push past the numerous sandworms, shooting towards Leon just as the Titan's frame expanded and it drove its fist down once more. Leon screamed, slashing at the Sand Titan with all his might. The attack was powerful, enough to make me feel alarmed. But the same situation occurred, the attack cleaving through the storm, but phasing right through the Titan as Leon's eyes widened before he was engulfed by the massive fist, his body crashing down. Bang! Leon. Leon's body bounced off the sand, his face pale as he spat a mouthful of blood. At the same time, a figure moved close to him. Sand scattered in all directions once more, the harsh glare of the sandstorm making everything incredibly hard to see. Grains whipped through the air, stinging my skin and blurring the shapes around us until even nearby figures became little more than shifting shadows. Nevertheless, through Mana sense I was able to see that Anne had succeeded in rescuing Leon. Her gaze shot in my direction. We should leave. I clenched my teeth, looking at the enormous figure standing before us as a book materialized in my hands, and Anne's speed increased. She wasn't the only one. I boosted everyone else's speed as I used my integrated domain. Leave. It was as Almighty had said. There was no point in staying longer to fight the Titan. I didn't know much information about it, and even if I did fight it, I'd have to risk my life in order to beat it. I just didn't think it was worth it. Swoosh, swoosh. Thanks to the added speed, we were able to put more distance between ourselves and the Sand Titan as its enormous frame gradually disappeared into the sandstorm. Its outline became harder and harder to make out, until it was little more than a shifting shadow within the swirling sand. But the worms continued to chase after us. The ground trembled beneath our feet as they moved below the surface, the sand bulging and collapsing in rapid bursts before the creatures shot upward from all directions, forcing us to keep running. My mana drained rapidly as a result of my actions, but it didn't matter as I caught up with Anne and checked Leon's condition. How is he doing? I don't know, Anne replied as she held Leon's body over her shoulder. He seems to have broken several bones. He also left his sword back there. I wasn't able to get it for him. But if things had gone on, then it would have been really bad for him. That Sand Titan was a really bad matchup for him. Only a powerful elemental mage would have been able to deal with it. Crack. Suddenly, bolts of lightning shot in all directions, hitting the sandworms precisely, and sending them scattering back. Anne looked in the direction of the lightning, mumbling, like that. I also looked at Evelyn, but shook my head. There's no point. She'll have to go all out in order to do something meaningful to the Sand Titan, and by them she'll waste all of her energy. I have a feeling that the Sand Titan is going to be the least of our problems over here. Still, I looked around, making sure that everyone was present. I activated Eye of Existence. Quote! It almost felt as though someone had smashed my head with a heavy hammer, my skull threatening to split as I activated the skill for all of us. I just barely managed to keep myself from groaning as I nearly stumbled forward, the mana inside of my body dropping at an alarming rate. But I was prepared for this. Aware of just how much Eye of Existence consumed, and the fact that I had to use it on all of us, I knew of the risks that came with it. But it was worth it. Looking around and seeing the sandworms stop, I looked at Aoife, who didn't waste a single second and tossed each of us a sword. Hopping onto the sword, Aoife dragged us forward with her telekinesis, sending us shooting through the air at neck-breaking speed. We zoomed past everything as I kept Eye of Existence active for as long as I possibly could have while she carried us forward. Just as it was hard for me to use Eye of Existence, it was also hard for her to control so many swords at once while carrying us through the desert as her face paled every second. But we had no choice but to keep moving forward. I raised a hand to cover my face, feeling the sharp prickle of the sandstorm around us as grains lashed against my skin at our elevated speed. I didn't know how long we carried on like this. It must have been for at least a dozen minutes as our speed gradually started to die down. By now, I had long since cancelled Eye of Existence, my breath heavy as my mana was completely depleted. There was nothing left in the tank. Though the sandstorm still raged around us, we eventually dropped back onto the sand, slumping down as we took deep, heavy breaths. Ha! My lungs were on fire, and every part of me was exhausted. It had been a while since I had felt like this while fighting something. I thought I had gotten a lot stronger, but it's clear that the mirror dimension is no simple place. I'm starting to wonder how the people living here have managed to survive. This place was treacherous. Looking at Anne and Anaz, I started to have a newfound appreciation for the two of them. But before that, how is he doing? I forced myself up as I looked at Leon. Blood was still leaking out from his forehead, and staring at his twisted arm, it was obvious that it was broken. However, outside of those external injuries, he didn't seem to be in any critical condition. He should wake up in a bit. Anne replied after carefully looking at him. I'm honestly quite surprised he didn't sustain any more serious injuries than this. Considering monsters are usually stronger than humans of the same tier, that creature was clearly a high-rank destroyer rank. To only sustain this much, your friend over here is quite sturdy. I know, I sighed in relief after seeing that Leon was fine. However, I didn't smile. Sitting back down in the sand to catch my breath, I looked around. The sandstorm still raged on, making it hard for me to see ahead. But above all, I wasn't able to detect a single thing. Be it mana sense or emotive magic, I wasn't able to see the monsters coming before it was too late. Was it because they were underneath the sand? Was that why I wasn't able to sense them? Or was there more to it? I need to quickly think of a way to get into the main city. As strong as we are, it's clear that this place is still too dangerous. We need to. I could barely finish my thought before I suddenly grew alarmed, feeling the sand around us begin to shift. The ground trembled slightly as the sand lifted and slid away, cascading down in thin streams. Then figures began to emerge from beneath the surface. One after another, they rose out of the sand in all directions, until we found ourselves completely surrounded. My heart sank. What sort of dog shit luck was this? Chapter 858, Karatog 1. The sand scattered to reveal humanoid-looking figures. I immediately tensed, looking at the others. They were all similarly tensed, Aoife and Kira moving to shield Leon's recovering body while Anne moved in front of Anaz. Given my current situation, there's no way I can put up a proper fight if they're monsters. Are we going to have to run away again? That was my initial thought. But soon, I realized something. They're humans. I could see them clearly now. The orbs floating inside their bodies. There's no doubt about it, they're human. I muttered once again, my eyes narrowing as I focused my attention on the orbs in their bodies. With this, I felt a sense of relief. I was out of mana, but emotive magic was different. It used minimal mana. In that sense, I could fight. What did you say? They're humans. How? Everyone looked at me, but I didn't look back at them. Instead, I fixed my eyes on the humans in front of me. While it was true that they were human, their current attire made it hard to tell. Their entire bodies were covered from top to bottom in strange tatters resembling those of mummies, their sizes varying from one to another. But if there was one thing they all had in common, it was the chains dangling from their arms and ankles. They looked quite familiar to the ones we found back in the forest. Surrounding us from all sides, they stared at us cautiously, each holding a different weapon. They didn't attack immediately. Instead, they quietly observed us as they released quiet ticks from their mouth. Tick, tick. Were they communicating? I stood up, pretending to be fine while looking at them. This is so weird. They were all strong, but not strong enough to pose a threat. But that wasn't what was weird. What was weird to me was how they were able to appear in front of us without me noticing at all. Was it really because they came from the sand? As the tension in the air rose, Anne suddenly stepped forward. Give me a moment. She looked around, her gaze eventually settling on one of the robed figures. Unlike the rest, his clothes were different, darker in shade. The moment Anne's lips parted, a strange language flowed from her mouth. Uruk, Talik. The figures around us paused, their heads slowly turning to look at one another. But eventually, the dark-clothed figure spoke. Salata tiam sain Turk. It replied in a similar tongue to what Anne had used. But it was clear that while Anne knew the language, she wasn't very proficient in it, as she took her time forming each sentence before speaking to them. Honestly, this was fine. I was fine for as long as she knew how to talk to them. Although we have some devices to translate, it doesn't seem familiar with this language. When we get into the city, I'll try to see if they have some sort of spell or device to translate for us. Call Sen Rimini O'Ara. The conversation between Anne and the boss lasted for several minutes before she turned her attention back towards us. Quote, I am not very proficient with the language, but I still understand enough to communicate with them. In essence, the people before us should be the Nomen. Nomen, they're those who have failed to qualify for a rank and are trying to make a living through the scraps that can be found from the monsters. Many of them are slaves, having sold their lives to provide for their families. What? Anne extended her hand. I promised them some food in exchange for the information and guidance towards Karatog. Noticing my confusion, she added, that's the city's name. No, I got it. I took out several bags of food that I had stored inside my ring and handed them to her. I just didn't expect the situation to be resolved with some food. You'll be surprised to see just how valuable food is here. Anne smirked while taking the bags and handing them to the Nomen. Immediately, the group took the bags and opened them up, their body language noticeably more jolly as they grabbed several of the items inside and shoved them into their mouth. The moment they began to eat, I caught a glimpse of their faces as they pulled their masks down. It was then that I saw their mutilated features, scars running in every direction, their dark skin also marked with bruises and burns. Don't be surprised, Anne spoke, taking note of my expression. This place is quite different from most places that you've been. In this place, the only rule that matters is status and strength. If you don't have strength, you're nothing to this place. And you're telling me they're weak. I looked at the group ahead of us. While they weren't anything noteworthy compared to us, they were still relatively strong, at around the 4th to 5th tier. This was considered good in any place that I had been to. And yet, she was telling me that this wasn't even enough for them to qualify for a good status. The law only protects those who manage to rank. Anyone who doesn't get a rank is not protected by the laws of this place. Anne quietly replied while looking at the group as they devoured the food provided to them. There are a few other ways for some to gain status, but the most famous way is through obtaining a rank through a ranking battle. Quote. Looking back at the Nomen, there was more that I wanted to ask, but Anne merely shrugged her shoulders. This is as far as I've managed to learn. Don't ask me more since it's really tough. For now, it's best if we enter the city and get some rest. Her head turned in Leon's direction. Most importantly, he needs to heal up. Quote. You're right. I also looked at Leon. His complexion was still pale, but he was still passed out. Unlucky. He would have normally have lasted a lot longer, but he had gone up against a high-rank destroyer ranked. One that couldn't be dealt with by physical attacks, either. It was just the worst matchup for Leon. Kami Sorenthel Miron used a telephone Malian TK. Suddenly calling out for Anne, the Nomian leader gestured a few things to her. Anne looked confused at first, but immediately understood a moment later as she looked back at us. He's saying that they're ready to leave. He also said that we need to be careful about the way that we move. The sandworms detect us through sound and vibration. If we stay completely still, the sandworms won't attack us, and at the same time, if we want to avoid attracting their attention, we should not step on the sand. Quote. For some reason, the explanation felt so self-explanatory that I felt like smacking my own head. Why didn't I think of that? It made sense if I thought about it. That was also not a hard problem to resolve. I looked at Aoife. You talk half, I take the other half. Quote. Yes, but I'll need more time. Same here. The idea was simple. We used telekinesis and flew over the sand. Although it was going to take a large toll on us, if we recovered enough, and we went at acceptable speeds, we should be able to do it until we reach the city. And even if we don't, we can just take a rest. Either way, I have plenty of food that I can share with them so that they can guide us. The plan was clear. With everything said and done, I relayed the information to Anne, who relayed it back to the Nomen, who paused before looking at each other and shaking their heads. Anne's brows furrowed. Kellic, Sam Heldine, Kate Allen Mores Yumian Tali and Saren Sunshawn Nal Tiak. Quote. Anne put on a troubled expression. Eventually, she nodded and looked back at us. They have to leave. There's no choice for them. They also have a strict quota that they have to meet. If they don't meet it, their families will be sold as collateral, or they won't be allowed back into the city. Quota. What for? Quote. For monster material and bodies. They're used for both clothes and food. Monster material. I had a sudden thought, shifting my attention back in the direction of where we came from. Anne's eyes lit up as she had the same idea as me. Turning her attention back towards the gnomon, she quickly started to talk with them. They all exchanged glances. After a brief moment, one of the gnomon's bodies sank into the sand, fading from our line of sight. What sort of ridiculous skill is that? I felt the sudden urge to learn the skill. The urge only grew stronger after he came back a few minutes later, communicating with his leader, who looked back at Anne and gave her a nod. She didn't need to translate this part. That's a relief. The other gnomons sank into the sand, all fading from our line of sight as Anne sat down on the sand, closing her eyes to catch up on her stamina. She also looked mentally exhausted from all the translation. Mustn't have been easy. I stopped bothering her and similarly closed my eyes, trying my best to recuperate my mana. For the next step, I needed to do so. About an hour passed like this. Although I didn't manage to recover all of my mana, I did manage to recover a significant amount. When I opened up my eyes again, I was surprised to see several large corpses lying in front of me. When I looked around, I saw the gnomon quick at work as they efficiently cut down the sandworms into pieces. From the way they handle the knife, it almost looks like they're some professional chefs. I stood up, walking towards the corpses to get a better look. The sandworm's body was very large. Although it wasn't as big as the sand titan, it was still very large. Probably as big as a large ship, with its outer shell being extremely hard. Moving towards one of the corpses, I tapped on the outer shell to feel just how hard it was. Talk. The sound bounced off like I was hitting heavy metal. It's no wonder they want to use for material. With skin so tough, a skilled laborer can probably turn it into fine armor. Tapping the outer shell again, I was reminded of something as my movements paused. Because the amount it helped was almost negligible, I often forgot about it and never paid much attention to it. However, after everything that I had gone through, something clicked inside my mind as I opened my status window. In the corner, I took note of several notifications. Filled square express plus 0.001%. The numbers were almost negligible, to the point where they felt irrelevant. But that wasn't what I was focused on. I was focused on the idea. Right, killing monsters does make me stronger. It makes me gain experience. But why? Why was I gaining experience? Looking back at the monster's body, my breathing grew heavier as I placed my hand over its hard shell and closed my eyes. I didn't know how long I kept at it. It felt like an instant to me, but maybe it took longer as a certain voice shook my head out of my thoughts. Julian. It was Evelyn as she looked at me. It's Leon. He's awake. I see. I pulled my hand away from the monster, looking at it. I'd normally be excited about Leon's recovery, but at this moment, I could hardly think about it. Bah, thump, bah, thump. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat as it pounded loudly inside my head. I think I got it. I swallowed my saliva. I think I found the secret behind the experience. Chapter 859, Karatog 2. How are you feeling, Leon? Like I've been hit by a gigantic monster. Ah. Julian moved closer to Leon, his lips pressing together as he bent over to hold Leon's hand. Let me hold your hand when I tell you this, but that's exact. Fuck off. Leon slapped Julian's hand away. You think I don't know what happened? Honestly, probably not. It all happened so fast. Leon's jaw tightened, but he eventually sighed, letting it go. There's no point in arguing with him. Every part of his body ached. From his skull, down to his arms and legs. He could feel several of his bones had broken, but he wasn't particularly concerned about his injuries. In fact, now that he was conscious, they were starting to heal rapidly. Well, I'm glad that you're awake. I'll fill you in on the situation later, but for now, rest up. We'll be leaving in 10 minutes. All right. Oh, and about your sword. Anne couldn't get it because of the situation. Was the word important? If you want, we can. No, it's all right. It wasn't my main sword. Is that so? Then that's good. Julian nodded, turning around to look at the sandworms. Don't beat yourself up too much because of what happened. It was just a bad matchup for you. I would have struggled the same. If anything, you did well in grabbing its attention. Things would have been quite bad had you not done so. Thanks. Well, I'll go. As I said, we'll leave soon, so try your best to recover. Will do. Leon smiled as Julian turned around and left. In all honesty, Leon had already been filled in on the situation by Evelyn and the others. Julian joined up a little bit later. Thus, he knew about the weird people roaming around them, chopping down on the numerous sandworms. Leon felt a sudden pat on his right shoulder as Kira looked at him from above. They're almost done on their side, too, but there's no need to rush. If you feel any discomfort, just let us know. Either way, Aoife is the one who will carry us. Quote. Hey, what? Am I saying something wrong? No, but, then what? Quote. Never mind. Aoife didn't bother arguing with Kira as she continued patting Leon on the shoulder. She did so a couple of more times before eventually leaving. The only one that remained was Evelyn as she stood in silence, carefully staring at him. But eventually, all she mumbled was a soft, "Get well," before leaving. Leon smiled back at her, watching as her back moved towards the others. He stared at them in silence, maintaining his smile. Yes, he smiled, because that was all he could do. Even as his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white, Leon continued to smile. For, it really was the only thing he could do. We'll be on our own once we arrive at the main entrance of the city. Entering the city is not that difficult, but the issue is that we'll have no status once we enter. Unless we can provide some use to the city, we'll be kicked out within the first 24 hours of our entrance. Anne's voice echoed in the background as I quietly stared at my hand. I tried my best to pay attention to her words, but there was something else that was taking over my mind. Something a lot more important. Status can only be acquired in a few different ways. 1. If you're a merchant. If you can provide some goods that can catch the interest of the people, you'll be able to earn a few more days in the city. But even that is limited to a few days. You can also become a gate warden, meaning that you'll stand by the gates to protect the city, but the mortality rate of such a job is extremely high. Runes. The monsters' bloods contain runes. I had never noticed it in the past, but now that I had gotten a good grasp of them, I was almost certain that the blood of the monsters contained runes. Single quote. In fact, it may even be an outer rune. But I wasn't certain of this aspect. The main issue was that the runes were incomplete. There were only bits and pieces of them hidden within the blood, and although I could absorb them, the rate of absorption was extremely low. In order for me to speed up that process, I needed to find the complete rune. But that was easier said than done. There are a few other roles and jobs one can take in order to stay in the city longer. If you sell yourself to a ranker and become a gnomon, then you'll be able to stay for as long as the ranker remains in the ranks. Or, you can become a ranker yourself. The rune in the blood was incomplete. Like a tiny fragment of a bigger rune that I had to assemble. Like a small piece of a massive puzzle. If I wanted to complete the rune, I'd have to keep killing to collect more fragments in order to fill the rune. Wait, a thought occurred to me then. Since I've been killing monsters for a while and my experience has increased, maybe the system has collected a few of the runes for me. The thought made my eyes light up, but just as I tried to see whether the system had acquired anything, a hand pressed against my shoulder and shook me. Hey, Anne's face appeared a few inches away from mine. Are you all right? Did you listen to anything that I said? You're the one who asked me to find this information, so if you're not paying attention to it, then... No, I was listening. More or less. Oh, then what do you think we should do? We might as well use our daily pass first before figuring that out. I don't plan on staying in Karatog for very long. Worst comes, then we can just start trading some stuff. I've got an accumulation of items. And if that's not enough... I paused, chewing on my thoughts. Well, I shrugged. I guess we get a rank. What else were we supposed to do? Since that was the only option left, I wouldn't mind doing it. I preferred not to do it because of all the attention that we'd be receiving. After all, this was not friendly territory. In fact, I wasn't even sure if Cithras was here. If he was, no, it's unlikely. There's a reason why I decided to come here now instead of later. There was no better time to rescue Noelle than now. Wait, suddenly, Anne's steps came to a stop. The others followed her example as I did too, our attention falling on the gnomon ahead. They turned their attention back to us, pointing towards the distance while muttering things I couldn't understand. Anne frowned, seemingly struggling to understand before turning to look back at us. We're almost here. They'll be leaving ahead of us. Swoosh, swoosh. Not even a moment after her words fell, the gnomon all sank into the ground, fading from our line of sight as they most likely shot towards the direction where they pointed. However, even as I looked, I couldn't find the city. Where exactly is this place? I can't see anything, Kira mumbled, her eyes narrowing as she tried to look into the distance. After the distance we had walked, the sandstorm had cooled down quite a bit, making it easier to see, but despite that, we still couldn't find a single thing. Even as we decided to walk ahead, the city remained completely hidden from our line of sight. Strange, Anne mumbled, squinting her eyes as well as she looked ahead. According to them, the city should have been ahead. Did I get lied to? No, you didn't, I replied to her while looking ahead. The others couldn't see it, but I could. The numerous orbs that floated in my vision right ahead of me. What? I can't see anything. What are you saying? Just follow me. I didn't answer them and just walked ahead. It wasn't like I didn't want to answer them, but I wouldn't be able to explain to them even if I wanted to. Instead, it was much better for me to show them. And sure enough, swoosh, taking another step forward, something began to appear in the distance as the strong wind continued to blow our way, the sand prickling against our skin with even greater ferocity. Tall walls made of sandstone slowly came into view, their height stretching several meters high and rising in layered tiers that climbed one above the other. Time and sand had worn their surfaces, yet the structure still stood firm against the raging storm. At the very front stood a massive gate, its imposing frame towering over the entrance as if guarding whatever lay beyond the walls. How come I didn't see it? Do you think it was some sort of illusion? Maybe. I think that's what it is. A mirage. The moment the walls came into view, I felt the back of my neck prickle as multiple gazes fell in our direction. Thankfully, our faces were covered as we walked towards the gate. As my steps sank into the ground, Anne walked ahead. With her being the translator, it was best if she took the lead. Eventually, she arrived before the gate and looked around. Just as her lips parted, something manifested from the ground beneath. Swoosh, swoosh, several burly men appeared, sand crawling down their bodies as they were dressed in attire similar to the gnomon, though theirs was a darker shade of brown. From the moment they appeared, I could instantly tell that they were a lot stronger than the people we had previously met. However, they were still not enough to make me feel threatened. But then again, for just the front guards to be this strong, just how strong are the people inside? My heart skipped a beat for a moment as Anne communicated with them. The conversation went on for several minutes until she eventually turned towards me, her hand reaching out as I understood what she wanted and handed her some food. The guards looked at one another before taking the food. At the same time, they handed each one of us a strange scale. It was pitch black in color and looked incredibly durable. Keep the scale with you. For as long as it's black, we'll be able to stay in the city. From the moment the scale turns white, we'll be haunted by everyone within the city. I drew a cold breath. What sort of savages? Let's go. Anne stepped forward, reaching for the massive gate and pushing it open with both hands. The enormous frame slowly pulled apart, the hiss of the wind beginning to fade as it was replaced by a low, steady humming sound. Soon, the inside of the city was revealed to us. Welcome, Anne said, pushing past the doors. Welcome to Karatog, the only city within the Land of Fire. Chapter 860, Karatog 3. What is? Stepping past the massive gates, I didn't expect anything particularly mind-blowing, perhaps just a city protected by towering walls, with people living in fairly normal conditions like the other cities I had been to. No, maybe that was a little too much. I understood from the start that life in the mirror dimension wasn't easy. I knew that the people were struggling, and I was prepared to see some of that struggle. But what I was greeted with was something that I had never expected in a million years. What is this place? Are we really in the right place? It was dark. The streets were wide and dim, but trash littered the surroundings in uneven piles. Corpses lay by the roadside, their bodies slowly decomposing under the relentless heat, a faint stench lingering in the air as the heat beat down on the silent streets. Ook! The smell was strong, enough to make any of us feel like puking. I just barely held myself back while I looked up. There was not a shred of sunlight. No, I can see something. A small hole up ahead where I can see some light, but it's very small from where I'm at. It almost felt as though I was at the bottom of a well. Yes, that's how I'd describe it. I did expect this, but the situation is a lot worse than I previously imagined. Anne spat while looking around and trying her best to keep her expression in check. We all turned in her direction, wondering what she was saying. Anne just continued. I thought you guys would have already understood from the moment I told you that we only have a day to stay here, but not just anyone can stay in this city. The Land of Fire is particularly lacking in resources and food. That's why it can't host many people, and there's only one city. Walking ahead while covering her face further with the robe she had, I followed from behind, using Lament of Lies honest just for precaution. The air was dry, and the warmth felt intense. This is a city that values people based on their worth. It doesn't matter where you come from, who your father is, or what your lineage is. What matters is that you're strong and can provide for the city. The stronger you are, the more privileges you have. Like, pausing, Anne looked up. Towards the small hole in the sky. You get to live on the higher levels. Higher floors. Anne pointed toward the distance, where an enormous dark pillar rose into view. It stood at the very center of the city, towering above the surrounding structures as it stretched upward all the way to the top, its massive form visible from nearly every direction. Connected to it were several large platforms that stretched out toward the edges of the walls, forming what appeared to be the next floors. There were still gaps between the levels, and from time to time, I noticed things falling from above, presumably trash from the higher levels. You can only go up through the pillar. However, only those who have status are granted access to the higher levels. Taking out her scale, she looked back at us. We've only been given access to the lowest level, and by the time our time is up, we'll be forced to leave. Anne turned her attention to me. How do you plan on proceeding? Quote. I remained silent, unsure of how to answer her. My goal was simple, to find any information regarding Noel and where he was locked up. In fact, as of right now, I wasn't even sure if the information was correct. I had been going blindly through Panthea's words, but there was no guarantee that Crazy Bitch told me the truth. This could have very well been a trap. But nevertheless, it was the only lead that I had. Taking a deep breath, I massaged my face. I looked at our group before eventually deciding to settle down. Everyone looked exhausted. In particular, Leon, whose face was still pale, was recovering from his injuries. I'll think about something after we get some rest. Quote. All right. Anne nodded her head in agreement as she started asking around for directions. In the meantime, I took a moment to carefully observe the surroundings. The architecture was strange, the houses built from brittle sandstone that looked worn, many of them broken in certain areas. A few stalls stood along the streets, but they carried little, their empty displays giving the place a bleak, neglected feel. Small steps led toward different areas, the narrow passages and uneven pathways making everything feel incredibly cramped. One thing I particularly noted, aside from the state of the place, was the people. While many of them were malnourished, some even having chains on their arms and legs, they were all rather strong. They're not much weaker than an Oz. Subconsciously, my head drifted in his direction. Quote. I know what you're thinking. I looked away. Okay, I found a place where we can stay. Anne came back a few moments after. It's not far from here, and we should be able to stay for the night. But, there's the but. They don't accept food as payment. Anne quickly explained the situation to us. It wasn't complicated. In short, the only way for us to pay was through the city's currency, which was the con. Thankfully, I've managed to get some by exchanging it with someone. Anne showed a small bag. However, it isn't enough for other things. The most I can do is get some rooms. That's more than enough, I replied while looking back at the others. They had been strangely silent from the moment they stepped into the city, their expressions stiff as they took in the scenes around them. The reality of the mirror dimension had probably sunk into their minds for the first time since they had been here. Yeah, this place isn't a pretty sight. There were a lot of corpses, and people who seemed to be struggling to even walk straight. But if there was one most noticeable thing, it was the lack of children and old people. Most likely, they've been thrown out of the city. Anne had already explained it to us, but the weak didn't get to stay in this place. This included children and old people. There was a limit to the number of people who could stay, and every slot was desperately fought for by the people. Single quote. But of course, if the parents can somehow secure a job or get a rank, they'll be allowed to stay. Taking a look around me, I took a deep breath, trying my best not to think about it. This place was truly sickening. It was. Thump, 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 thump. My thoughts were abruptly disrupted as a loud drumming sound echoed throughout the entire city. Thump, thump. The drumming was loud enough to make the ground rattle as the people around us stirred to life. What's going on? What is happening? Is the city getting attacked? No. Anne's eyes narrowed as she looked up. She wasn't the only one. All the citizens looked up at once. Towards the empty space in the air, and just as I grew confused, several large holograms manifested around the city as my eyes widened slightly. What the hell is that? Ranking battle, Anne announced, taking a deep breath as she looked up. At the same time, the holograms shifted as two figures appeared within a large arena. The walls were lined with deep scars, while the ground was encircled by towering stands. Spectators filled every side, their cheers silent yet somehow still felt as the people around us erupted in excitement, their expressions bordering on fanaticism. Sem Gorion, Gorion Sem Ishma, Gorion, 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 Ishma, 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 Asima. I stared at the hologram in silence as the fight began, the two figures in the hologram lunging at each other. The fight was intense. Both sides attacked each other relentlessly, employing all sorts of tricks and tactics in their attempts to kill one another. Their movements were fast and precise, each strike carrying clear intent. Although I couldn't accurately gauge their strength from where I stood, it was obvious they were far from ordinary fighters. The sheer brutality of the fight made me wince as blood spilled across the sand. Faces caved in under crushing blows, while pieces of flesh tore away and fell to the ground, exposing bone beneath. But above all, ha 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 ha, Ishma, Saliam K. Isham, rum, the sheer fanaticism of the people around me threw me completely off. Looking around, it almost felt as though I wasn't watching humans, but a pack of bloodthirsty hyenas circling wounded prey. It's over. The fight didn't last very long. Both sides were quite evenly matched, but the balance broke when one of the fighters suddenly bit into their opponent's face, tearing away a chunk of flesh. Seizing the opening, they drove their thumbs into the opponent's eyes, blinding them completely. The rest was a bunch of gore as the warrior named Gorion didn't stop, attacking over and over again, turning his opponent into a pulp. Gorion, 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 Gorion. Cheers erupted all over the place as the people celebrated fanatically while Gorion stood on top of the remains of the other warrior, raising his large hands above him as the people in the stands cheered just like the crowd beneath. I took in the scene around me and pursed my lips. There's nothing else to see. I already knew this place was brutal, but it went beyond my expectations. Still, I wasn't here to witness the fights. I was here to figure out Noel's location. There was no need for me to stay any longer. Let's go. There's nothing else to s. My words came to an abrupt stop a moment later as something dropped in Gorion's direction. Catching the item, Gorion raised it into the air as the crowd cheered alongside him. I looked at the object in his hand. It looked like a small vial filled with a red liquid. My heart skipped a beat as Gorion brought the vial to his mouth. Then, under the cheers of everyone present, his body started to heal rapidly. From the deep wounds to the ones that seemed to be impossible to heal, every single one of his wounds healed as he tossed the glass vial to the ground before roaring. Wah! Gorion, 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 quote. All the noise around me seemed to fade, replaced by a constant ringing in my ears. When I turned my head, Leon's gaze met mine. Julian, that's, I know, I answered, the words coming awfully calm. Quote. I know.